thank you to everybody for joining us today for this launch of the Leeds Early Career Publishing Prize in 2025 with the White Rose University Press. So today we'll be hearing from Professor Nick Plant, so that's our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, from Kate Petherbridge, who's the White Rose University Press Manager, and a special thanks to Alice Siberry, who is a specialty neurodiversity consultant and academic lead at Priest Puddle, and will be telling about her experience with the press. So this is the kind of running order that we're looking at. We're already on the first point, which is me just saying hello and welcoming everybody today. Then Nick's going to give us an overview of the prize, its relevance, and a little bit about the outcome of previous Leeds and Sheffield iterations. Before we hear from Kate, who'll tell us a little bit about working with White Rose University Press for the success, if you are successful with this prize. And then, as I say, we'll hear from Dr Alice Siberry about her experience of actually, who was a winner of the prize at Sheffield. Is that right, Alice? Yeah, you're nodding. And then we'll have time for Q&A and a bit of an open discussion that I shall do my best to chair. And I will stop the recording at that point so that colleagues feel a bit freer to ask any questions either in chat as we go, post any questions, or we can you can come on the mic as well at that point because we won't be recording. So yeah, as I say, welcome any presentations. Just to very quickly plug another couple of upcoming events. So these are a regular series of events that we run. So there's another related event in collaboration with the Knowledge Equity Network on Tuesday, March the 6th, that you can book through the same place as you probably found this. We've got another open lunch event on open science and climate change in the global commons. Again, that's in partnership with the Knowledge Equity Network, so everybody's very welcome to those. And there is an archive of previous events on the library blog. But for now, I shall introduce Nick Plant and hand over to you, Nick, if that's okay. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see you in glorious Technicolor. That's all right.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Welcome, everybody. So for those who don't know me, my name is Nick Plant, and I am the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at the University of Leeds. In addition to that, I'm a toxicologist by training, so I'm very much a STEM person. And you may think then, well, what am I doing here? When we often think of the long form being social sciences, arts and humanities, etc. So hang on and I'll answer that question. But as well as being here because of being my role as a DVC, I'm also here as the editorial board chair for the White Rose University Press, and also one of the founders for the Knowledge Equity Network, Ken, which Nick very kindly advertised one of our webinars just before. So as you can see, I have many different hats on today, and I guess you might ask, why do I have so many hats? And the answer is really because I believe passionately in equity of opportunity. I believe that as universities and indeed as individuals, we have a need to ensure that everybody has the opportunities to succeed. So I always think of universities as being drivers of the knowledge economy. In my realm, the research and innovation part, we create new knowledge, we make new findings. And then we move into knowledge exchange and into student education, and we pass that knowledge on to other people. We give it to the people who can actually use it. And this, to me, is where we have to make a critical decision. We can decide that we will only give our knowledge to those people who can afford to pay or who happen to live in an area where something is being taught, or happen to know someone who happens to know someone who knows somebody else, whose Uncle Fred knows something about something. We can leave it to chance. Or we can make the decision to actively push knowledge into the hands of people that use it. The reason I care passionately about this is, as a toxicologist, I spend a lot of time looking at things that could harm humans, animals, plants in the environment as well as in our food chains, our medicines, etc. But what I really need to do is to get that knowledge out to the people that can use it, whether that be farmers understanding which pesticides to use, whether that be a nurse practitioner knowing how to talk to a patient and think about the medications that they're giving them. This is getting knowledge to them. They do not read scientific journals. They do not go around and be able to afford to pay to get past paywalls. So to get the knowledge in their hands, we have to commit to be open. And this is why the White Rose Early Career Publishing Prize is so important to me, because it gives us this opportunity to ensure that knowledge gets out to those people that can use it. So this is why open is critical. I guess then why White Rose? White Rose is important not only because it represents the three universities of York, Sheffield and Leeds, but also because White Rose University Press is a digital first format. And I think this is really important. And I think it's really important for three reasons. I'm sure there are more, but my three top reasons are reach. Everybody who researches, you want people to read your research. There's nothing more depressing than publishing something and realizing the only person who's read it is your mother. So you want stuff to get out there. We know the digital format is really effective at ensuring that your material gets in front of people, not just close to you, but in different disciplines, internationally. It gets your research out to be read and then to be used by others. The second one is accessibility. I love a physical book. I think physical books hold a special place in many people's hearts, but they're actually not the most practical thing to transfer information. There are all sorts of barriers around disability, around language, around cost, that means physical books are not always the easiest and most accessible format for transferring knowledge. A digital first publisher makes it accessible from the get-go. And this is really important. You can build that accessibility in. But finally, and I think this is where I particularly look to this audience, this is your chance to really go beyond the written word. As soon as you start thinking in a digital format, you don't just have to think about words and maybe the odd picture or figure. You can think about including video clips. You can think about, we've had 3D representations of Sheffield Castle that you can virtually fly around. One of our early career publishing prizes from Sheffield is going to use Jupyter notebooks to allow coding to be included to work alongside. So really, the challenge for me is you have to challenge Kate. You have to say, this is how I would like to present my research. This is how it will really help get that knowledge out there. And then we as a press have to think about, how can we make that work? Will it work? Are there other alternatives? So thinking about those things, it's a chance to really go beyond just the written word. So I was involved in the first iteration of the prize a number of years ago now, and that one was focused on Leeds. And it's really nice time for us to be launching the second iteration of the Leeds version of this prize, because now the first three winners from the Leeds prize are right on the cusp of being published. So we've got one that's physically out and published, one that is due out in April, and one that we think will be out just after the summer. So these have now gone through the whole process from concept to an actual published book. Between the first Leeds Prize and the second one, there have been 2 iterations of a Sheffield Prize, and I'm really grateful that Alice has come along today as one of those successful authors to tell you a little bit about what it's like to go through that process, what it's like to be, first of all, an author, but secondly, an author with White Rose University Press. And again, it's great timing because Alice's book is just moving into production. So it's just on that cusp of going through the process to become the finished version. So I'm going to finish my introduction by asking the question, is the Early Career Publishing Prize for you? Should you be in this room listening to this meeting? And I think I'd say there are 3 things you need to consider. The first one is, do you meet the criteria? They're listed on the website, and Kate is going to talk to you more about the process and the criteria. So first of all, just make sure you're eligible. And that goes without saying. Anything you do in the rest of your career, first thing to do is make sure you're eligible. But actually, the next 2 are more important. The first one is think about the philosophy. Are you somebody who really wants to put your research out there to really help it get into the hands of people that can use it and make a difference? Because if you are, then this prize can help you do that. And the second one is, are you currently thinking in a silo? Are you counting yourself out of opportunities because you don't think that they are for you? So I joked, I'm a toxicologist. We don't produce a lot of long form books. But actually, the early career prizes absolutely tell me I'm talking rubbish, because they cover such a diversity of discipline that actually any discipline you're interested in is eligible to be published. So if you look through the last 3 iterations, we cover subjects from mental causation to neurodiversity within British policing, to unmasking cosplay and supernova neutrino observations. You can't get a much broader breadth than that. So if you fit into any sort of research, then the Early Career Research Publishing Prize should be for you. So hopefully I've made you all think that this is where you want to be and act as the warm-up act for Kate, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the prize itself. So I'm going to pass over to Kate now. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. That was brilliant. I'm going to attempt to share my slide. Bear with while I do this.
You should have a green arrow. I found
Yeah.
it.
Do you see it?
Yeah, and it seems to be okay. Thanks, Kate. Yep,
So,
perfect.
to give you a quick overview, Nick really helpfully, Nick Shepherd put the link to the website, and it's a really good idea to have a look at that. It's got lots of information on there. So the prize is really to celebrate doctoral research and to support early career researchers in publishing that first monograph and to publish it open access to maximise the reach. Practical details, the submission window opened yesterday and will close at the end of September. And it's quite a long window because we understand that, drafting a book proposal and everything that goes on with it is quite a hefty thing to undertake. So we want to give everybody the chance to do that without feeling rushed or pressured. So it is intentionally quite a long window for submissions. To be eligible, you need to be a University of Leeds doctoral graduate, and you needed to have your degree awarded since January 2022 and before the disclosure of the submission window. So you go back to the next point, that's a key part of being eligible. There are terms and conditions on the website that talk you through in a bit more detail, things around eligible formats and things like that. But if you have any questions about whether you think you're eligible for the prize, you can get in touch via the contact details on the web, and we'll definitely have a chat with you to see where you're coming from and what this perspective on that is. Submissions are basically 2 elements. There's a form, and a main element of that form is the book proposal for a volume based on your doctoral research. And we also ask for a submission of a sample chapter of that book that you are proposing. And I'll talk about both those elements in a bit more detail. And there will be up to 5 shortlisted winners of the prize, and each person will receive an actual cash prize, which is always nice. And then the prize winning proposals will go through the White Rose University Press commissioning process, and we will explore how we can work with you on delivering your monograph. So as Nick touched on, there have been 3 previous iterations of this, and the last iteration in Leeds was incredibly successful. All 3 winners were commissioned by UP to produce their monographs, and we've seen from Nick that they're in various stages of production and publication, as we've heard. And just to give you a bit of a look, this was the first one of these to come out. We can pop a link in the chat afterwards. I can't do it at the same time as typing, so I'll do it in a minute. But the volume is a really engaging philosophical volume on philosophy of mind, and you can see just in the brief window since it was released at the very end of last year how much engagement we've seen with the volume, which shows the importance and the reach of open access, as Nick was touching on. So we were incredibly pleased to see the reaction that volume's had already. So if you are interested in this and you think it could be for you, do have a look at the website. I know it sounds like a bit of a fob off, but it really has a lot of really helpful information that will help you judge the best way forward. It covers the submission process, what the application will need in more depth than I can cover now, and it also covers different people involved in the process and what will happen if you're chosen as the prize winner. I also think it's a really good idea early on to download and read through the application form, which is available from the same website, just to think about how well you can sort of get engaged with those different elements of the proposal and whether you can articulate your work successfully. Because some research doesn't work as a long format. Some research is much more suited to multiple articles, for example, and we want to have the best solution for you as a researcher trying to share your work. So do have a quick look early on, because that will give you a really good perspective about how to move forward with the prize if you decide to. So the application form has different sections. As you probably expect, there's a section about you as an author, and captures all your details, but also information about your doctoral research, professional experience you have, what you bring as an academic to the discussion. There's a place for a recommendation from a relevant academic as to why this research is suitable for publication. We'll talk about that in a moment a little bit more. And there's also a place where you can share details of an experienced academic who will act as a mentor through different stages of the process. And again, both the prize website has information for mentors themselves about what could be involved with that role. And it also, I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second too. And then the main section of the form is for the book proposal itself. So just on those 2 bits, the recommendation, it could come from someone like your supervisor or an external examiner. It could potentially reference things like assessment feedback, recommendations to publish if there's permission to share that information. It basically gives an external contextual view as to the value of your research. And in terms of an academic mentor, we really strongly recommend that it's not your doctoral supervisor, because they are incredibly close to the project. They're as close as you are in lots of ways. And what we really want is someone who has insight they can share, but can have a little bit of distance to act as a critical friend almost at key points in the process. So that could be supporting the submission by reading through the form and some sample chapters before sending them. It could be support at peer review as to how to handle different elements of feedback if those contradict, for example, or if they go in a different direction than you'd like. But also someone who's available as a general sounding board as you write and develop your work, should things come up that you've not considered previously. So it's a really important person to have, particularly if you're working as an author for the first time at scale. So going back to the application form, the purpose of the form, and it's really important to think about this, it captures information that we as a judging panel will need for the effectiveness of the book proposal. And just to touch on the panel, we've put together a panel to look at the submissions from across the University of Leeds. So Nick Plant, who we've already heard from, will be on the panel. as will Professor Luke Windsor, who's Dean of the Doctoral College. And it's fantastic to see Luke on the call here. And also Claire Knowles, who's an Associate Director in the University Library. And I'll be joining them on the panel from a publishing perspective, and we'll look through the effectiveness of the proposal that you put together. And that really is the effectiveness of that proposal. We're not peer reviewing it in terms of the value of the book itself. It's how well you are communicating all the elements of the volume that you are suggesting can be published. The form also gives that context by introducing that external perspective from that recommendation, and it shows that you have support by identifying events. From an academic perspective, RUP as a press will support prize winners from the publishing side, but definitely having an external academic perspective is really helpful. And the proposal section of the form, if for prize winners, will be what we take out for peer review as part of the commissioning process. So it is a really important. And then the proposal itself, it's really important that you can showcase your research, how the proposal will share your work. It conveys not just the research itself, but how you will communicate that effectively as a book, which is really what's important as part of a proposal. So content, shape, structure, but also highlighting the contribution. What are you doing that's new? How will you advance the discussion? And the audiences that you think the book will be of value to. So it shows why your volume stands out, why we should publish it, really. And I can't stress it's not an exercise in form filling. Some of these things, as members of the HE community, we're very used to form filling. This is really a chance to show the value of your research, not just to us, but also if you're successful to the peer reviewers. And it's really important to provide the detail to do that effectively within the proposal. It's also really important to propose a book to communicate your research and not to propose that we publish your thesis. A monograph and a book are incredibly different from a thesis. Thesis has a very specific use in assessment. It has a very narrow audience, and it's written in a very particular way, whereas a monograph has much more freedom to communicate your research as you feel fit, unconstrained by the assessment requirements of a thesis. And you can change the focus to enhance the areas that you think are of real interest. And it's your opportunity to almost present your research starting with a blank page, as to how you would surface what you think is of value, rather than showing how you demonstrate the ability to fulfill certain areas of the assessment criteria. So you do, as part of the proposal, need to show how your book will differ from your thesis, because the thesis is part of that existing literature, and we want to know what you're doing that's different with the book. Just on the sample chapter, it's really important that that is, again, from the book and not lifted from your thesis or a previous publication, because it shows how you're going to write this content for the audiences that you're engaging with. And it also shows how you will deliver the volume you're proposing within the structures that you're describing. It also forms part of the peer review process. And for reviewers, it gives real concrete evidence as to how you will deliver the book that you are describing in the proposal. And it answers a lot of questions. We get a lot of comments on the sample chapter, as well as on the proposal, from peer reviewers who are looking at the project. Just on timeline, the window is now open. It closes at the end of September. We, as a panel, will look to consider those in the following couple of months, depending on how many there are, and shortlist the winners. And then we will have an announcement by the end of December, we would hope. And then we will contact prize winners from White Rose University Press to discuss what we do from that point on. And so the next steps would be that we would meet with you and with your mentor to work through the proposal in detail, ask any questions we've got. If there are sort of questions that we think need final tweaks before we take it out for peer review, we'd support you in making those changes. And we talk you through the commissioning process and then what to expect if commissioned. And just very sort of quickly, the commissioning process, we would take the proposal and the chapter out for review. It would be a single blind review process, and the proposal, the peer review feedback, and the author's response to the review comments would be discussed by our editorial board, who may ask for further information, potential revisions, and would eventually reach a commissioning decision. And that could be that they would like to move forward the project, or it could be for different reasons that they don't feel it's a good fit for us. If commissioned, we would then go through the normal stages of publishing that you would see as an author. So there would be time and space for the author to produce their final manuscript, which we would liaise with the author on to make sure that they had the time to do that comfortably. What I would say about the White Rose University Press approach is that we particularly like to work collaboratively with our authors. We want to support them through every element of the process. We want to involve them in conversations about the design and the look of the book, so we make sure they're involved in all that sort of thing. But we also want to make sure that they're supported and they feel comfortable. So we set timescales that work with people who have other commitments, because obviously people will be developing these volumes alongside core roles, whether those are in academia or outside. And we want to make sure that we can support the author in delivering the best version of the volume that they can. So I think that's pretty much what I was going to say. Thank you so much for having us as part of the session. And I will pass straight to Alice. Nick, is that correct?
Yeah, whether you'll be able to share now, I'm not sure, Alice. Tom, you might need to just give Alice the rights to share, but have you got the button?
I think I can do it.
Okay.
Bear with me.
We're back on track. So thanks, Alice, and sorry for the...
That's okay. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today to share my experience of winning the Sheffield Early Career Publishing Prize in 2023. This journey has been both personally and professionally transformative, and I hope that by sharing it with you, I can inspire other early career researchers to take that next step in making their work accessible to a wider audience. So let me take you back to 2021 when I had just completed my PhD. Like many early career researchers, I found myself at a bit of a crossroads. I'd spent years immersed in research, but the idea of turning that work into a book felt overwhelming. I was anxious. Was my research truly book-worthy? Could I communicate my findings in a way that made an impact? And despite these doubts, I knew I had something worthwhile to share. I just didn't know what it was going to look like at the time. So when I came across the opportunity to apply for the Sheffield Early Career Publishing Prize, I saw it as a perfect fit. Not only would the publication be open access, which aligns to my core ethos, similar to what Nick was saying earlier, that research should be accessible to everyone, but the manuscript would also be in an online format, meaning I could explore innovative ways to push the boundaries of accessibility and publish in academic publishing. The application process that Kate's just told you about was quite straightforward, if I'm honest. There were clear guidelines about what I needed to do. I had to submit a sample chapter, and I decided to choose one of my favourite topics because I thought that would be the easiest thing to try and write about. And one of my favourite topics is neurodiversity and the language that police use to describe it. In my proposal, I also suggested incorporating video-based introductions for each chapter as a way of enhancing engagement and accessibility. To a little bit of my shock, I won the prize, and with that, the real work began. I currently work as a neurodiversity specialist, so at the time, I had moved away from traditional academic settings. For that reason, I was a bit worried about diving back into academic work and writing. Surprisingly, writing a book was easier than I expected. I had agreed with my manager at work to take about 1 to 2 days a week, depending on how busy we were, to be able to write my book. And with a clear vision and a strong motivation to make my language accessible in the field that I was writing about, the words kind of just flowed. I was able to use my thesis and reframe and reshape it to enhance my ideas that I'd had since finishing my PhD in 2021. The team at the publishing press, Kate, Lucy and the rest of the team have all been incredibly supportive, not only encouraging me in my writing, but also pushing me to think bigger. They suggested adding even more multimedia elements, including podcast entries for each chapter. I loved this idea, and we set about bringing in experts to discuss key themes such as partnership working in policing, vulnerability and neurodiversity, police culture, and the impact of neurotypicality. And I wanted to share a picture of me doing that last summer. We booked out a radio recording room that one of my colleagues had access to, and I spent a day in here, and it was very hot, recording the podcasts. I was also supported by my academic mentor, Professor Nathan Hughes, who has not only been a fantastic cheerleader and sounding board throughout the entire process, but also facilitated the ability to use a proper recording studio at the University of Sheffield to record my video introductions for each chapter, which I was able to do. And there's another picture of that. Throughout the process, the publishing team provided consistent updates, and I requested to have structured deadlines, something I found invaluable as a neurodivergent author myself. We met regularly online, and each meeting gave me a clear goal to work towards. This level of support and structure helped me to stay on track and ultimately complete the book on time. Yay! Once the manuscript was finished, it underwent peer review, a process I found incredibly valuable. In addition to having 2 people from my field review the manuscript, I also asked an ex-police officer to read the entire manuscript and provide some feedback. As someone who is quite anxious about receiving feedback, when the emails with the peer review first came through, I was so nervous I had to ask my husband to read them first. However, the feedback was really constructive, and ultimately I was grateful for the opportunity to refine my work further. I also realised that at some point, hopefully lots of people are going to read my work. So it did actually feel quite nice knowing that 3 people from both the academic and practical field had already read it and provided some feedback. After incorporating the suggested revisions and updating the panel, I received final approval, bringing us to where we are today on the cusp of publication, with final copy edits underway and a hopeful release date set for this summer. Reflecting on this journey, I would describe the process as seamless, supportive, and succinct, and for me, not particularly overly stressful at all. The Sheffield Early Career Publishing Prize provided me with not just an opportunity to develop personally and professionally, but also provided me with a vision and an outlook of what accessible academic publishing can look like. So if you are a current PhD student or an early career researcher, I do urge you to consider opportunities like this, no matter what your imposter syndrome might tell you. Your research deserves to be shared, and there are pathways out there like this that will support you in making that happen. I wanted to share with you 3 of my top tips, if you're interested. So the first one is choose a supportive academic mentor. I was incredibly lucky to have Professor Nathan Hughes, who has always had my back throughout my PhD process. Nathan wasn't directly involved in my PhD process, he was actually one of my examiners. So I was so pleased when he agreed to be my mentor for this process, as I knew his level-headedness would balance out my chaotic brain. Having someone who supports and guides you can make a huge difference. Be passionate, but be planned. I wish I had have thought more about my final chapters earlier on. I definitely dove in with a lot of passion to write the chapters that I was excited to write. And this was really helpful in terms of getting started. But when I got to the end, I found I did struggle a little bit to wrap up what was such a huge piece of work, while also ensuring that I'd shared the main messages. Perhaps there is something about not needing to write in such a linear fashion, i.e. start to finish, and I would recommend definitely having some sort of writing plan, for sure. And my final tip is accessibility is key. This prize offers an incredible opportunity to explore multimedia options that both Nick and Kate talked about earlier. And these options improve accessibility and reach. Whether it's video, audio, or other interactive elements, thinking outside traditional academic publishing can make your research more engaging and absolutely more impactful. Later this year, I will be publishing my book titled Diversity, Difference or Disorder, Neurodiversity within British Policing, and it explores how the police interact with neurodivergent people. It examines key themes such as reframing neuro-inclusive police culture, the landscape of partnership working, the language used within policing, and the concept of inherent and situational vulnerability in relation to neurodiversity, among other critical discussions. I'd like to thank the White Rose University Press for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting me here today to share my experience with you all. That's me.
Thanks very much, Alice, and I'm glad to hear it wasn't stressful, unlike this Zoom meeting has been for me, which has been rather more stressful perhaps than you writing that book. So thank you very much for that. We've had a couple of questions. I did suggest we'd stop recording, Tom, for the questions, but while the ones I've got in the text, perhaps we can answer on the recording, since this is I'm going to have to figure out a way of splicing this back to the other recording as well. But if colleagues are okay with me just posing those questions. In the meantime, if anybody does have another question, feel free to put your hand up, post it in the chat. We will stop the recording after we've addressed these questions, and then if you want to come on the mic and ask a question in person, you can do so as well. But I will just ask this question quickly about self plagiarism. So oh, could I ask you to mute yourself as well while you're not speaking? Thank you. So yeah, just a question, perhaps for you, Kate, I guess, how it works in terms of the use of material and self-plagiarism. So we're writing our PhD in book format. I mean, we can't then use that same content and data for journal articles, or would it be a case of paraphrasing the scientific content in our thesis? Any quick thoughts on that one?
So it might also be useful to have Nick jump in as well as chair of the editorial board, because there's obviously lots of knowledge about academic writing in there. If you are writing a book based on your research, then obviously you are generating that content. If you were to just lift and drop that in somewhere else, you would need at the very least to reference that, but it would be, you know, at risk of plagiarism, self-plagiarism, depending on how much work you've done to recontextualize that. I mean, writing should always really be for the setting that you're writing it for, and recycling content is not necessarily the best approach. I think that from our perspective, obviously, the chances are you will have a thesis that covers the same content or a lot of the content, but it will be delivered in a very different way. And so that's the key element in terms of how to avoid that self-plagiarism. I think I'll bring Nick in to see if he can make that more coherent, because I appreciate that wasn't particularly.
Thank you, Kate. I think the key thing is a book is not a journal article and it is not a thesis. We do occasionally receive at the editorial board proposals where the sample chapter is a chapter of a thesis, and you read it and you can tell it's a thesis. They read very differently. When you undertake your PhD, if you publish a series of short papers, each paper is focused on an area, on a question, and answers that question. When you're writing a book, you have the chance to look at the wider context. So you might have a story of a series of experiments running through it and a series of thoughts, but actually you have the time and the words to step up a level and really think about that macro context. So what do your findings really mean in the wider context? How will they change how people think? In the case of Alice, how will this impact how people think about the police, or the police think about how they work with people? How will it's a much richer format. So think about them as two different styles, and actually that problem very much goes away. It's also something, as we go through the process, you get very much guided by the editorial teams, because they are as keen to make sure that we don't have any issues in that area as our authors are. Thank you.
Thanks, both. Have you anything to add to that, Alice? From your perspective, do you intend to publish further a similar material, or is it not really relevant in that context for you?
I suppose it goes back to what Kate was just saying there about contextualizing it. I think with the book, there's a stronger narrative to it, I guess, in that you want to sort of share a bigger picture, whereas when you're writing a journal article, it might be that you're focusing on something more specific. And it has to be in the context of whatever that kind of brief is. So I suppose that's what I just said. And I'd also say, in terms of translating from your thesis to a manuscript, you're not being assessed on the book, whereas your thesis is very much written to be assessed. So there is a difference there as well.
And perhaps just to ask you this other question, Alice, around how was actually the process of writing the book? So somebody's asking whether or not you were expected to write full time. I guess not. I think it's just a matter of go through the process, and maybe give us an insight into your process and how long it took you to write the book and how onerous that was for you.
Yeah, so I work full time, so 5 days a week, a very typical working pattern, I suppose. And when I approached to do this to put this proposal in, I spoke to my manager and I said, what kind of agreement can we come to allow me some writing time, particularly because I do value my weekends. So I just asked, and she said it was fine for me to use at least 1 day a week, possibly two if we weren't sort of super busy, to do that. And I work in a role where I'm able to have that flexibility. I'm very fortunate to have that. So I had a lot of space to kind of write the book. I planned that time in, and I think I don't know if Kate recalls, but I think I did it in about a year. From sort of start to finish. I can't quite remember, but it was sort of August to August, I think, wasn't it, Kate?
Sounds about right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it took me about a year to write, and that was sort of like a day a week, maybe two, and maybe the odd weekend, particularly closer to the end. So yeah, it was for me, it was quite a seamless process. I think I knew what I wanted to say and what I wanted to write about and how I wanted to progress my ideas from my thesis between 2021 into 2023 when I won the prize. So I think that really helped. I think having a writing plan helped as well, sort of knowing where I was going next, what stages I need to sort of get to. And for me, deadlines were a huge thing, and Kate and the team were really helpful with that. I think one of the first meetings I had with Kate was, I need you to set me some deadlines, otherwise it will just never get done. And they were very obliging to do that, and that made it helpful that I could get things done efficiently and on time as well.
Great, thank you. Could I ask you, Tom, to stop the recording, and then if anybody does have any questions.